Et c'est toujours Charles Trenet avec une chanson qui s'intitule Fleur
I
bleue.
have no doubt that they react the exact same way to tornado warnings. I can almost guarantee you that most of them think, hey, you know, so what, these guys are hyping it up again. Nothing's going to happen here at my house. I noticed that your partner in crime, Michael Moss, just joined us on board. Moss, you were commenting on this a couple of weeks ago. What do you think about those poll numbers? Did you hear what I covered there?
Well, 6 apartments is, as it suggests, 6 different apartments, each with one tenant living there. And they all live right next to each other, but they have no knowledge of what's going on with the other people. So you can imagine maybe an 8-centimeter wall, and then a person, and they have very different lives. And in this context, they're also receiving like television or radio, where it's telling them about the outside world, which is mostly news about the ecological crisis, but they're living their daily lives ignoring it, I would say, in a denial.
About 10.2 psi. That number has sort of been chosen to optimize flammability in the cabin because you've got higher percentages of O2 and certification.
Well, I think it has to do with scale. So more on a microscopic scale, there's a tremendous amount of activity in life and reproduction. But on the human scale, their lives are very simple and plain and not dramatic. But maybe if you have a microscopic scale, or also the scale of like there's some rats or some fish that go through a whole process of deterioration and have an explosion of life and then death. It's as if the drama is happening on a level that they don't see, but it's still there. I think it's an interesting question of what is beautiful, and I have the tendency to think that the things that are on the borderline between pretty and grotesque are kind of the most beautiful or the most captivating. So yes, I also found somehow the decay quite aesthetic. It's all in one set in my studio, and then it's the same apartment redecorated 6 times, and then all the people in the piece, the 6 actors, are real actors, or at least at the very minimal working in theater quite a bit. It's a matter of shooting one, finishing it, then going to the next one and completely finishing that. And you'll notice that there's not very many windows, so it's very much contained and artificial, although convincing more or less.
With the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Seattle has been studying the change, and he's in town this week to talk about what the ice retreat might mean to Alaska's oceans. Overland says this year's Arctic ice retreat was dramatic.
The summer ice loss this year is so unusual that there's a question of whether that has actually changed the whole climate for the Alaskan waters, and we have no comparison in history to go by, so what happens next is really uncertain.
Then I received a letter from my grandmother who lives in Alaska, and she said that the permafrost had melted. And naturally the permafrost doesn't melt at all, so it's the first time in 40,000 years the permafrost has melted. And it struck me as like big news, although it wasn't in the news at all, it was just her personal experience. And then I start to feel that perhaps it's really something huge happening to the Earth that'll affect everybody eventually, and she happens to be the first person that I have direct contact with that is directly affected, that is personal to me. And I think that changed the whole context in a way, where I became worried, I think in a very simple way. I like to read some about science and biology, and I guess I just asked the question of how it affects our daily life. And right now, due to the way the environmental crisis has come about, science is starting to play a bigger role in our lives, meaning that the government and the politicians who are not scientists are making decisions based upon like scientific data. And I would say, in my own opinion, that rather than following the like chain of truth, like the scientists say we've done these studies and they suggest this, the politicians are more using it as just information that can present for one argument or another argument or whatever they want to present that's beneficial to them. And this may be much more similar to the way a lawyer thinks, like argue your case regardless. And a scientist, I think, has this different position of searching for what really exists and what's, let's say, the truth. And the general population, I think, now has to become more comfortable with science in general to understand whether we really are having a crisis or whether they're being manipulated so that they be thinking in certain ways. And the developments that are happening right now are really amazing. Like the oil companies are presenting themselves as the great, friendly, environmental people. And the most green companies on the planet are the oil companies and stuff. And people are starting to believe it. That like Chevron put us into the problem, Exxon put us into the problem. They're the ones that are going to get us out, and it's not going to happen. Like